Well, welcome to episode 4 of the Church Tech 101 podcast. Today we're excited to have our very first guest, evangelist Ben Everson. He's also a composer, musician, and travels all around the country, singing and preaching. Welcome, Ben.
Hey, thank you so much, Tim. I'm glad to be on with you.
Well, I kind of got to know you. I guess you came and did a Christmas concert at Front Range Baptist. And I don't know if you remember this. And then you sent me an email and said, what sort of sound system does your church have? Which I think is probably something you send when you fly places without your
Yes.
system. And I think I may have sent you a rather comprehensive response, as I recall. But that's really
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
I think that's the only time we've really met in person, and then sort of like ships in the night since then. But I'm glad to count you a friend and offer any advice when I can help.
Oh, yes. And I remember that because that put me at ease. I traveled so many different places, and I'm sure we're going to dig into this more. But, there are various levels of competency when it comes to sound technicians and sound guys, sound ladies, too, in churches as we travel. And that's not meant to be an insult. Sometimes you've got somebody who's just volunteering. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll be glad to fill a spot. You've got everything from that all the way to the people who are ultra professional and, kind of have their own kingdom back there. But it was encouraging to me when I was coming in without my equipment to know that, hey, it sounds like this guy knows what he's doing. So that was good. It went off well. And I do think you're right. I think that is the only time we've met in person, but we've certainly chatted online, and I feel like I've met you more than that. But that was our first and only meeting, I suppose.
Well, you kind of talked about how as you travel, you see kind of different levels of maybe training is a good way to put it, or knowledge. And that's kind of my burden, really, is to help volunteer techs kind of get to another level, a better level. But one of the things I wanted to talk about is, as you travel, how do you think churches can use their tech more effectively? What do you see churches doing and you think, well, I mean, they could do, if they just did this, even with stuff that they have, they would be in a better spot.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, I've been in evangelism now at least part-time. I've been full-time for 24 years, something like that. But I was even doing it part-time if I can, even as a student and on faculty at Bible college, I was traveling in revival work on the weekends. And so I've been in hundreds of churches. I don't know if it's thousands really, because, as an evangelist, you repeat churches that like you and you go back to them. But certainly hundreds of churches, and over the course of time, I think everything starts with an attitude. What is the purpose of the, for lack of a better term, sound system? What is the purpose? And I know it's more than that. I know it's video. I know it's all these other things, but most of the time we're talking about sound. And I have found that the churches that have a more clear purpose, even if it's not written down, although having it written down would be ideal, but the churches and the people who have more of a clear purpose on, hey, this is why we're doing what we're doing. I have a suggested purpose. And in fact, for your listeners, they may not be aware of this, but Tim actually joined me and we co-wrote a little booklet that I think is on Amazon for a few bucks.
Oh,
Just
okay.
beginning sound.
I had forgotten about that.
That's right. Yeah. And because I used to be, I was trained as a sound guy in junior high and high school, and I ran sound for different things, and I've got my own recording studio and stuff. But then technology keeps going faster and faster, and I'm more on the music side of things. So I well, I don't want to get bogged down in that too much. I wanted to turn to someone like you who's more on the cutting edge, or what's going on and out there, to make sure that my information wasn't outdated. But in that booklet, we talk about the fact that, sound is important because, that passage of scripture where Paul is saying, I'd rather speak, I'm going to modernize it here a little bit, but, I'd rather speak one word that people understand than a million in a language nobody understands. And
Hmm.
we know he was talking about tongues originally, and then also by application, intelligibility. Like, if you're blessing yourself over in the corner, that's great for you, but that doesn't help everybody. But an application, a secondary application of that is if the preacher's up there preaching or the singer's up there singing, and because of sound issues, the congregation can't understand, or it's painful to listen to, or it's distracting the timbre of the sound coming out. That actually is an application we can make from that passage, uh, saying, hey, the goal of the sound person, the goal of the tech department is not to be seen, but to kind of be invisible and just help the people
Hmm.
listen and, partake of the message that's going on. So that's a long answer to kind of kick off because that's not very specific. But as I've traveled, I've found that the churches that have more of that goal, more of that
Hmm.
vision, even if they wouldn't say it that way, are much more successful than the ones who are just kind of like, well, you got to turn it on.
Right.
If that
Well,
makes sense.
yeah, sort of the unmanned approach. People sometimes ask me, like, what's your philosophy? And I always say, clear, understandable sound for singing and preaching. That's kind of how
I love
I've
it.
broken it down. And
Hmm.
I've been in churches where the sound system was loud. It was a big stereo, but it was muffled, or you couldn't understand what was happening. I remember one
Mm.
of the first systems I ever did, and this really startled me. But afterwards, a guy, probably in his early 50s, came up and he just involuntarily threw his arms around me and said, "That's the first time I've understood all of Pastor's message in 12 years." And
That's wonderful. Yeah.
and that has always carried through with me because you're right. Sound needs purpose. It's not more equipment. It's not HVAC. It's not lights. It has
Right.
more.
Right.
It has more import. It can be a communication block or a communication aid.
Hmm.
Good. I like that.
Absolutely.
I like that. The philosophy is important. So
Oh, then
maybe go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, maybe a little more.
Well, the idea we have similar personalities, I can tell.
Yes.
So we're running over each other.
No, go ahead. I want to go ahead.
Well, you had asked more specific questions, examples and stuff. And, I don't know if you want to start with negative examples first and then go to positive, or you want to start with positive and go to negative, or kind of back and forth like a tennis match. I'm not sure.
Oh, why don't we mix it
Um,
together? I guess.
okay, perfect, perfect. Well, one thing that I'll bring up first of all is the idea of the worst thing that can happen based on what I've observed is actually not a technical malfunction, although we hate those. It's not um, having equipment that's less than ideal, because we all have to deal with that from time to time. It's actually somebody who's got the opinion that they are building their own kingdom.
Hmm.
And that is, hey, okay, the pastor, he runs the church, or the choir director, they run the choir, but I am the emperor of the sound, and as opposed to a servant's heart and a servant's mentality.
Hmm.
That is the number one thing that I dread when I'm coming into a church. I need to meet up with a sound person so that we can, mesh our systems together. And frankly, Tim, it's a big reason why I travel with my own system. Is we could probably get away with not traveling with our own system quite as much, but I don't know the person. I don't know who's going to be back there. Are they going to have their own ideas of how to run everything, and it's my way or the highway? Or are they going to have that, hey, how can we serve? I am the person that God gave the responsibility to help make this work for you, but it's not a we're all building the same kingdom.
Hmm.
And that is probably it's a mentality. Now, I'm not saying that a person doesn't protect the system, as a uh, something that people would understand. You don't let people shouldn't let people just go pound on the church piano. Little kids come up and smash it with things. You take care of that. You don't let people just misuse equipment, and the person who's in charge of the sound or any of the equipment, video equipment, there ought to be a sense of protection, of stewardship, really is what it is.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't turn into this kingdom mentality where it's like, yeah, well, the pastor wants this done, but we know a better way to do this. Um, and so that, even though that's not more of a specific uh, example, it certainly is something that we run into from time to time.
I see that a lot,
Ah,
and I think
yeah,
some of that is that, when you have somebody who is of a technical aptitude,
yeah.
sometimes it goes along with it that they're extremely opinionated about, "It has to be this way. I'm in charge of this. Don't touch anything." And sometimes those things go, I think, hand in hand. And,
Mm,
some of that's interpersonal with the pastor. I see a lot, can we talk about this, and I've seen situations where, they had to ask the person, "Hey, we can't have you volunteer anymore because we need things to be a certain way, and you're just always going off the rails," and they won't come under authority
mm.
sometimes. And but I think that's an excellent observation. I have noted that too. And then sometimes I have volunteers that have good technical aptitude and they have a good spirit about them as well.
Oh, that's
And
oh,
that
that's a double blessing.
I love that. I love working with folks like that. That makes things a lot easier on my side. But interestingly, in the same way, when I come in to redo a whole sound system, sometimes I'll get the cold shoulder from somebody, because they weren't consulted, or,
Yes.
we're changing all the things that they have spent years building. And so I'll see that as well. But that's an excellent point. I had not thought of that, but that's good.
Well, I have an example of the man who trained me on sound. He just retired recently. His name's Larry, and he really had a great um, uh, blend of technical know-how with the idea of wanting to protect the sound as well as meet the needs of what was going on. So here's an example. We had a guest preacher in, this is in the early 80s. So, and this preacher, which I'm sure you would know and a lot of people would know, and some people are probably going to be able to guess, but I'm still not going to name him. He's not alive anymore. But he was visiting our church, and I was a little kid at the time. So he told me the story. I was there, but I was like 6 years old. Anyway, he came in and he was well known to be a really shouting preacher, which sometimes I like that. I think we can use all kinds of different personalities, but he came twice to the church. And the first time he came, he liked to boss around the sound man, and so, hey, you're going to turn me up, you're going to leave me up, and don't touch it, et cetera, et cetera. Well, there were no monitor speakers on the platform at that time, and so he couldn't hear how loud he was to the congregation, and people's ears are just bleeding, metaphorically speaking. Well, he came back the next year, and Larry was ready for him this time, and he had monitors on the platform. So when the visiting preacher was like, turn me up," he just turned the monitors up so that the guy was thinking he was louder, and really blasting it out there, but yet he could protect the ears of the people. And I thought that was a great way to use your technical know-how to be able to meet needs of what this preacher's visiting preacher, which I've got as a preacher myself. I have my opinions on the right, how far the authority of a visiting preacher, which I'll just give you a heads up, it's zero, to tell a church what they have to do. If it's your own preacher, if it's your own pastor, that's one thing. If it's some guest that you invited in, he doesn't have the right to come in and boss everybody around, all that stuff. But I thought this is a great way to kind of help it go smoothly, protect the people at the same time meeting needs. And that took technical know-how because your average person might not think of that. Oh, well, just put the monitors up and turn the monitors up so that it meets his needs, whatever those might be, and then can protect the ears of the people. So, when he told me that when I was in junior high, I was like, oh, I like that. It's mastering your craft to the
Mhm.
best of your ability so that you can utilize that to help a service go smoothly and help the truth get out.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent example. Using, having grace and and just fixing the problem. I find that, sometimes there's almost a conflict between the sound guy and church staff. And I have before
Mm.
diffused a situation like that where there was no communication happening with the technical staff. And,
Oh yeah,
they
that's
would get like, a missions presentation 5 minutes before the service or something. And man, it was a particular church I went in, and they were just they sat on opposite sides of the aisle in the pews, and I felt like I was
oh boy.
moderating. And, I
Yes.
said, Include your technical staff in your planning email. Is there something wrong with that? Can you do that?" "Oh, no, we can do that." I said, "That's great. Then they'll know. Hey, in 2 weeks, we have a guy coming. He's going to have a presentation. See if you can get it early." Yeah, and some of that is just, comes down to communication. I think where, you have a little bit of a clash there that can easily be remedied if the sound guy feels like things are just being sprung on him every single service.
Well, yes, and to kind of build on that a little bit, I have all these examples of when I was growing up because I saw these things play out in front of me. Um, there were times when things went really smoothly and times when they weren't as smooth. But a great example is if you can get, if you're listening to this and you're a pastor or in leadership somehow, if you can get your tech guys on the same page with you, that actually helps. And what I mean by that is you're not going to be able to stop the missionary who comes in and hands them a jump drive at the last moment and it's like, oh yeah, here's our missionary presentation and blah 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 blah. It's going to happen.
Yeah.
Don't want it to happen. They should have emailed it ahead of time. There should have been communication or something like that. But if the sound guy knows that the pastor is on his side and the pastor can say, listen man, I am sorry, I called them a month ahead of time and we exchanged emails and he didn't send it, then your sound man's not going to be mad at the pastor, because he knows the pastor was trying. And I saw that play out in with the man who's trained me, where he was technically good enough that you could hand him just about anything at the last moment and he could make it work. And but then people start assuming on him, right?
Uh,
Like, oh yeah, just give it to
yes.
him, he'll make it work. And the times when he'd get irritated, I thought were pretty justified because people would do that. Well, then I also saw some years where people did exactly what you said. And they were like, okay, we got this presentation coming up in 2 weeks. They dry run it sometimes on like a Saturday.
Yeah.
And that has spilled over into how we do our ministry when we do Christmas concerts. It's not like the one that I did for you guys because there was no like visual media also.
Mhm.
But I'm calling the churches up. I send out a packet that says, hey, we've got this special, we're going to have to integrate with your sound and your video. I send that 6 weeks ahead of time. And then we have a call set up for 4 weeks ahead of time. And I can always tell if they've read the packet or not. And then like, you know what, instead of, well, let's go through it now, I tend to say, well, you know what, brother, how about I call you back? You call me or I'll call you as soon so you've had time to actually read the packet. Because in the packet, I put the tough stuff like, hey, we have to have this. It has to be this way, not because I'm trying to rule everything, but because we have to have our monitor, we've got our background track because it's synced with the video. It's not like PowerPoint where someone's back there clicking it, it's all synced up.
Mhm.
And I could get into the weeds with that. But I guess suffice it to say that that communication is vital. And if you feel like you're all on the same page, then when some guest comes in and does it the wrong way, then you can commiserate together and the pastor from the pulpit won't do something terrible like, well, we're having some trouble back there, aren't we? Well, okay, well, I guess we'll have to double his, cut his salary, which is zero, or whatever. Those jokes that are supposed to like put people at ease but actually make it worse. um, I, as a guest, even though I'm not a pastor, I've I have little things that I say if something goes wrong, like, nobody notices the sound man unless something goes wrong, because it's gone right 10 times in a row, but the 11th time something goes wrong and everyone looks at the sound man. And I've had so many sound guys talk to me, hey, I appreciate you said something, because it's exactly true. That, if everything goes right, no one even thinks,
Hmm.
but one thing goes wrong and everyone wants to pile on. So having that good relationship, um, is vital.
Hmm. I agree with that, and in a lot of ways, um, tech is kind of the thankless job. It's something where you're
Mm,
expected to bat 1,000% every week, and when you
right.
bat 900, everybody's looking over, their shoulder at you, and things do go
Right.
wrong. As much as we try, sometimes it's even things that are out of our control, and but nobody, when the pastor calls out the wrong verse on a Sunday morning, I guess everybody's already looking at him, or when a sermon goes badly or a song goes badly, or you have to restart or something, I don't know. I just feel like maybe it's because it's me in the booth, you kind of feel that like, oh, but uh, just saying thank you too. I mean, just acknowledging somebody's ministry there because it is a place where you're not visible. And this year
Right.
we got a thank you card from a couple in our congregation. It was a Christmas card for the sound team, and they said, we really appreciate what you do up there to make the services work. And I think that's the second time in all my years of doing sound ministry that someone has given us a thank you card.
Wow.
And you don't do it you do it for the Lord. You don't do it for the visibility. But at the same time, n- people will say, to the soloist, "Wow, what a great song! You sang it brilliantly." But nobody will come back and go, "Wow, the way you mic'd that soloist, that was fantastic."
Right. Right.
um,
And that can be, and people don't realize that can be uh vitally important as well,
well,
because if you have that edge of feedback, where someone's running it so hot that it's ringing, well, you can't, you can't focus on the message of the music. It's really hard to focus on the message of the music. But then if the singer is not cooperating, so they're holding, it's like this tug of war, and it happens often, like in prayer meeting. That's where I think of it, although some singers do it too. And that is where someone wants to give a prayer request and they give them the mic, and so they think that holding the mic farther from their mouth is going to solve the feedback issue, right? So they go far, and if you hear the ring, they pull it back farther, and it's like, no, go the opposite. It's not going to bite you. It's not going to shock you or anything like that. Put it closer, and it's amazing all the little things that can happen. I remember, this is kind of funny. We were doing a Here's another Christmas concert story. We were doing a family Christmas concert, 6 of us singing, and it was Sunday morning, and I get up to sing a solo. I was going to sing "O Come Emmanuel," right? And as soon the music started, and all of the sudden, out of nowhere, we heard someone singing "Joy to the World" in Chinese, clear as day. And I don't want to try to imitate it, because it might be considered like I'm making fun of them, because I don't know how to imitate Chinese, right?
right.
But I could kind of imitate what that sounds like, and and it was clear as day. Chinese sing "Joy to the World," and at first I tried to ignore it, but it was coming through our system, and I'm like, "What is going on?" And people looked around, and I looked down, and fortunately, I was at a church where one of my best friends is the pastor, and he said, "Oh, I know what's happening. It's the Chinese church down the hall," and they had the same exact set of wireless microphones we had, and were set on the same frequency. So when they started their morning worship service, they turned on their microphones, and for some reason, our bank of microphone receivers picked their mic up and gave them priority. And all of a sudden it started coming through our system. And that was the weirdest thing. Well, now it makes sense. But that's one of those times when I'm thinking to myself, wow, there's just no way I could have foreseen that, because obviously when we set everything up on Saturday night, the Chinese church wasn't meeting. So, I wouldn't have known that those frequencies were competing.
Mhm.
But the church was good natured, and everyone had a good laugh about it. And then we changed the frequencies and everything right there on the platform. And they ran down the hall and said, "Oh, stop using the microphone." But you never know. Crazy things will always happen. You can't stop. It's like you can't be perfect. You can't bat 1,000.
Yes.
Stuff's going to happen. And of course, that doesn't mean we can't be the best we can be. But if if you have a good relationship with the church people all the way around, it goes a long way.
I agree, and I think, part of that, being pastoral staff is because I've been in, situations where, when things went wrong, the sound guy got the talking to afterwards. And, like it was somehow it was entirely his fault, and let's not do that again. And I think that sort of builds a toxic relationship with your tech volunteers where they're sort of living in fear that if something goes wrong, I'm going to hear about it from pastor after the service and I'm going to be in trouble. And
Oh yeah,
I think that's, you have to let that stuff go. It's going to happen. Um Roll with it, and this too shall pass kind of thing. And they're going to learn from that, but sometimes you can't learn from 'em. It's not something that they did. It's just something that happened, and that's okay.
right. Exactly. 100%. That's good. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Awesome. Well, any other things that you want to add? I know we're kind of creeping up on 30 minutes here, so um I don't know
Yeah. Well, just a couple things really quickly is, if I could give encouragements, 3 encouragements to people who are working in any sort of tech. And that is, it's not wrong. It's not sinful. It's not a bad thing to go find people who are technically good at what they do and learn from them. And what I mean by that is sometimes people say, well, I don't want to see any uh, uh, dramatic productions, for example, that aren't Christian, um, that type of thing. And without getting into the weeds here, confusing people, you obviously have to don't go to things that are evil and wicked and say, hey, I'm learning for stuff for church. That's not what I mean.
Mhm.
But to observe how people run things. There are times when you can watch how people will do, even let's to make it simpler, even churches that are not of the same stripe. Let's go there because that'd be easier to go with.
Mhm.
I'm not going to be the same as some of these churches that show up on a Sunday morning in a hotel where I flip on the television just to have something on while we're getting dressed for church. And it might be a good pastor, it might be someone that's not so good, it might even be someone that might not even preach the gospel, but their camera work is excellent, or their sound is excellent, or things like that. Um, it's okay to learn from the professionals so that you can use it for the actual truth, because we don't
Mhm.
want to fall behind when it comes to quality.
Mhm.
So, I this is something that I find is some people are resistant to when it comes to the area of music, which is more my main thing. And that is the idea that, well, oh, well, the secular world holds microphones, so we can never hold microphones. Well, you might decide in your church not to hold microphones. That's okay, but it shouldn't be because unsafe people have done it, because that's you have to dig deeper. Why do they do it? Or is there more than one way to hold a microphone? Which of course the answer is yes. You can use it in a wrong way or a good way, but don't don't automatically say, well, I can only learn from other churches that are just like us.
Mhm.
No, you want to learn I had a whole series of voice training for several weeks, an intensive voice training session, and it wasn't a Christian organization. They just taught me how to use my voice better. Well, I can use my voice to the glory of God, having learned more
Mhm.
from them. So don't be afraid to, read, to study, obviously within conscience and what the Bible says. That's the number one encouragement I think I'd have for men and women who want to get better at their craft. Um, and then the number one thing I'd encourage any listener, um, find ways to encourage those who are in the technical aspects. And Tim, you already touched on this, of course, getting that thank you note is a huge thing. And I doubt it happens very much
Mm.
in many churches, so how can you be a blessing? I've heard it put this way, and I highly agree with it. I've heard it in several different sources, but relationships, like profession, I don't want to call it professional relationship, but a ministry relationship is it's like a bank, and you can't withdraw if you've got zero in the bank. If you've never said to the sound man, "Hey, I appreciate your work," and did you have to be here yesterday to set up, or did you have to come in early to set up? Wow, I was still in bed then. Just acknowledging the sacrifice that they have made. If you don't put an investment into the bank, don't try to take a withdrawal out of it.
That's good.
So if you've never complimented, not flatter, but complimented or been appreciative of the sound crew or the video crew or whoever, and you've never said one good thing, well then maybe it's time to keep your criticisms to yourself. And because unless it's something really glaring, which probably the pastor's going to address anyway, try to just put those little deposits into a bank. Because if you know over the course of 6 months, if you say 10 good things, creative things, not just make up stuff for flattery, but if you notice 10 things that they did right, and that you appreciated over the course of 6 months, in that seventh month, when there's something that you're like, oh man, that song, it kind of hurt my ears a little bit. Can you help me understand why? They're going to be a whole lot more ready to say, actually, that was a little bit of a mistake. We brought up the wrong microphone, and then we had to switch, or the battery ran out, and we used the pulpit instead of the handheld they were holding. And it's one of those things. They're going to be a whole lot more ready to converse with you instead of going into self protection mode.
Mm.
So hopefully those are helpful and encouraging to folks who might be listening.
Well, I sure appreciate your time here, and so we're going to wrap it up here. We've been with evangelist Ben Everson, also composer, musician. Do you have any social media sites or anything you want to talk about, real quick?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We got a ton of stuff. I'll just say this: if you go to beneverson.com, I am literally in the midst of redesigning our website to make it easy to navigate, so people can hit our music, they can hit sermons, they can do everything you want to do. We've got a great project going on right now called 50 by 50, where I'm recording 50 new a cappella songs by the time I turn 50 years old. So that's kind of an ongoing thing that we just started. And beneverson.com, and that's with a V, Everson, the V as in Victor. A lot of people think it's a B as in boy, but it's actually a V. And, drop me a line. Say, hey, I heard you on Tim Hartman's podcast. And would love to hear from folks and hopefully be an encouragement. Thanks so much for having me on, Tim. I appreciate it.
Well, that wraps it up for today, and we'll see you on the next one.